Welcome to Gen Z Hoops, the Gen Z basketball, coaching, and sports business show. On this podcast, you'll learn from professional players, coaches, and executives from all over the world and see the court in a brand new way. And now, joining you courtside, your Gen Z host, John Hartophilus.
Hey, Con, what's going on?
Hey, how you doing?
So having a great day. Really excited you're able to take the time right in the middle of the season, right? Everything's going on. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I think this is going to be a lot of fun and can't wait to jump into all your stuff with the Pistons, NBAE. Like there's so many things that you've been doing that are just so cool.
Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. It's been a long ride of 20 years here. So.
And there's been a lot of good basketball that you've seen. So, but before we get, because I know everyone wants to hear about the Pistons stuff, I'm really curious about the nickname Kong, right? It's everywhere on all your social media. Where did that come from? I need to know because I was like, do I say Mr. Coumoundouros? Do I say Kong? What do I do?
You got to say Kong because actually, I don't even respond to John anymore. It's crazy. Mr. Coumoundouros is really strange. It's a lot of syllables. We don't need to go there. So, but it came from actually before I worked for the Pistons. When I worked at a golf course, like strong, like King Kong kind of thing. It was just some random guy. We're in the break room, and he just looked at me. I just remember this moment, like it's like there's plywood on the walls and stuff like that. Because we're in the middle of a shack. It's like Caddyshack, except we mow the grass. And he looks at me like this and goes, "I'm going to call you Kong," like that. Boom, done.
25 years later, there we go. Love
yeah.
it. No, I thought that's something. I saw you do a bunch of mixed martial arts stuff. I thought it kind of came from there. I mean, what is that like a big hobby of yours? Like, how does that kind of fit in with everything?
Yeah, it's a big hobby. It was more when I was a little bit younger. It's tougher now because with time and then my age, recovery. I'll tell you what, recovery when you get older, like anybody that criticizes an athlete at 33 and 34, 35, that's big. You got to do a lot of recovery at that point. You can't do that. That's where like guys like LeBron and all them, you see them like, I'm just like, wow. How that guy can actually still do what he does. But so I actually was really interested in professional wrestling, right? Because I was a huge wrestling fan in my 20s and I thought it'd be fun. And I was like, oh, I kind of want to get into this. And I looked into it and found out how much it costs. I'm like, wow, I can't do that. It was like $4,000 to go in a barn for a couple weekends in a row. I'm like, this is not right. So, and then I was always interested in wrestling, jiu-jitsu, things like that. And crossed paths with one of the players that was really into it. His name was Jonas Jerebko. Was it 2009? 2010, and got me hooked up with a local guy he knew that was Swedish too. That's how they connected for MMA stuff, and started training. And I just fell in love with the training and did a couple fights too. At that time, throughout like a few years from that, and just had a lot. I love it. It's just fun. I love the sport, and I love the competing. I think that's one thing I was at my time too. Is that in my life was I wanted to compete because I naturally want to compete with things. So it was nice to have an outlet to do that. I have a lot of fun.
That's so cool. The one thing I did do some research and I saw there's an IMDb page for you. I want to make sure it's actually you. It's you're the John Coumoundouros on there that did a triple Xtreme Cagefighting match. Is that in 2011? Is that I was trying to find the tape. I had to find it, but what was that? That's
funny that's on there. That was the same guy that was helping out like a local amateur pro production in Michigan. That was the XMA, XXM. I can't remember that Extreme Championship. Something anyway, and they were doing this break where like they're teaching MMA in between like light lessons, and I was a part of that. And I think the guy that was doing that, his name was Harley, tagged me with that kind of just like, oh, so I just kind of like threw it on there. That but it was nothing like like crazy. But it was almost like a quick commercial break inside of the show that was on TV. But basically, I was the test dummy. So if you watch the footage, it's me being thrown around and with a couple takes. And the funny part is he kept on messing up his line. So and he's doing judo throws. So judo, for everybody that doesn't know MMA as much, so judo throw, a lot of judo is being thrown. So that's where you like hit the hip, you look up, you see the ceiling, you're flying around there, and you slam the ground. I must have done 20 to 30 takes for each of those, where I'm just flying through there, slamming on the ground because he kept on messing up the line after like on the ground. So that was my experience with that.
That's hilarious. And I saw it through IMDb. And the one thing not everyone knows this is that the one big perk coming on the show is you will become an actor on IMDb because the show is listed on IMDb. So there'll be two things under your name. Most of these other coaches only get one. But that's definitely a lot of fun. But okay, I mean, definitely a lot of fun talking about all that stuff. But obviously, one of the coolest things you do is being the equipment manager for the Pistons for almost the last 20 years, which is so cool. And you've seen, right, 6 straight Eastern Conference Finals, all this great basketball. But kind of before we get into all that, what made you realize that that's what you wanted to do, and what kind of got you to the Pistons?
Well, I was always a Pistons fan growing up. I mean, I was a Pistons fan during the 90s, the teal era. And what happened was the same golf course I referenced earlier, I was working there, and the assistant trainer's son, who was was a team attendant too. I mean, we're in our early 20s, like 19, 20. And we're, just grinding our work there. Same work lifestyle, like 7 days a week, work as much as you can, and we'd always randomly as we're working, we talk about basketball because I was interested, and they needed somebody to not replace, but like to add into the guys there that would help out with the rebound, that would hustle, because the current coaches at the time were kind of agitated with like the guys that are there for a little long, and like they wanted like really people hustling. Like, it's crazy as it sounds, like this, you think that you when you get to that, there's just guys that get used to it and just don't care that much. So he knew like my background, and I think it was my work ethic and all that too, and the fact that we were friends, and he got me into the job to do that, and that's where I started, was just basically just rebounding for the home side for that second year of when Carlisle was here, the second 50-year win season, right at the start, like when we went on that Eastern Conference run, just doing that grind. Like, I just rebounded like to a point of where me and the guy Nick, it's just the two of us. They kicked everybody off except the two of us to rebound for the whole team pregame. And it was, man, that was fun just thinking about that. Yeah, it's funny to go back to that. I remember like my first time walking into the building through the tunnel. I'll never forget that moment, because you just walk through the tunnel and you just see like from a different perspective. It's just like, that was when I was like, this is pretty awesome. This is amazing. Like, how do you can't, it's hard to put that in the words. Like, just you feel like you're where you're not supposed to be. Like, you're behind security, you're behind like the curtain, and you just come out the same way the players do, and you're just like, wow. And then just rebounding for these guys that, like, you've been watching on TV for me, because I wasn't able to afford to go that many games. So like, it's just like, here's the guy right there in front of me, that was awesome. And then we used to hustle our butts off, and to the point where we tried to like rebound without a ball hitting the ground. that was our goal. So it was kind of fun.
Definitely, no, I can imagine that first, especially those first games being so shocking, so much fun. The one thing I thought was so cool is that, I mean, when you got there, you were the first full-time equipment manager in the history of the organization. But then as time went on, right, it grew to 17, and maybe it's 18 since I saw that stat on the internet. Maybe it's grown since then. But what was that kind of like, seeing the entire department just grow so much and become such an important part of the organization?
It's been awesome. So like, yeah, so it was a couple of years. I've only been the head guy for about 10 years now. So it was just with that grind where I started with there, I was working just game days. And then throughout that season, trying to prove myself, I started helping out more, and just like, hey, what can I help before and after? Doing it trying to do it the right way, which is really huge, how you go about wanting to do more work. And then when you can't do the more work, how you accept that, and just because some people get really upset, about that. So like, trying to do the right things, just naturally, I started working later, and I started working the next day, and I started working a day in between every once in a while, and then to the point of a few years later, I'm working every single day with that role of team attendant, but I'm doing equipment, helping out, because we didn't have an equipment manager, so we was kind of broken amongst like 4 or 5 of us, trying to get everything done. And eventually, I remember there was a year in Orlando, I was helping out. The trainer took me to Orlando for summer league during the summer, just because we had to get stuff, because the equipment world was just, you can see it from the public perspective too, is where it just turned from like 2 uniforms to like all of a sudden we have, it just blows up. I mean, the amount of apparel we have compared to like just socks alone and all that. So I was helping them out, and I was there supposed to go down for 2 days just getting started. Then they extended me another couple of days, and extended me another couple of days, and then before I knew it, my 2-day suitcase turned into being there for 2 weeks. And I was just down there and then helping out. And after that point, they saw the benefit and then promoted me to be the equipment manager.
So that's so cool, and obviously seeing that progression, how that hard work paid off. We're going to talk. I mean, I know you're all about that work ethic stuff, so I can't wait to just dive into that even a little bit deeper. But I mean, just thinking about maybe exactly what you do. I mean, there's so many specifics, like you had said, right, and that go into that working hard. One thing I thought was really cool that I think almost all fans don't know about is kind of just ball pressure and how important that is to keep all the basketballs properly inflated. And how some, obviously Denver, the Mile High City, the high altitude, that all changes. I'm curious if you could talk a little about that and how specific that has to be.
Oh yeah, so the ball pressure is supposed to be between 7 and 9 pounds, so generally 8 pounds there. So whenever you travel anywhere, if anybody knows anything about planes, so the pressure changes wherever you go. I mean, you're in Mile High, pressure changes, so the ball pressure changes. When we went to Mexico City, it was a big drastic difference. We had to inflate the balls because you just lost air pressure. And I mean, just little things like that. Even when you travel, throwing the balls underneath the plane, You're going up and down. And if you ever travel like this, the commercial that you watch your bag of chips, and your bag of chips is the same stuff as you're on, playing. This expands and it contracts and all that. It's the same way. It's just one of the many little tiny things you just got to pay attention to, because for me, if you reach the mecca of basketball, you got to have the equal amount of tools to go with that. And obviously, you ever see, it's funny, the movie Just Friends?
I have, yeah.
So he's like, a good skater can skate in anything, which is true. Yeah, a basketball player can play with everything, but we're at a level. Like, he's here, so my department has to be right there or actually past 100%. It. That's where I'm at. And so the little things of like ball pressure or towels that smell fresh. I mean, just anything. Because you want them to concentrate on basketball. You don't want any part of anything else other than trying to win the game, because you don't want them thinking like, oh, wow, this basketball's too not that inflated that well when they're supposed to be thinking about the game, to give them the opportunity of like taking away from that. And that goes with everything from uniforms to shoes to where the floor is, across the board.
No, it's so important. That attention to detail is huge, and you obviously have to be at that level. Just a professional in that industry in the same way to kind of keep that going.
Mm-hmm.
What it kind of look like in just the start of the NBAEMA, the NBA Equipment Managers Association, and obviously becoming the president there. Like, how did all that come into play, and what does that organization serve for?
That was so when I first got into was my very first meetings after I became like the equipment manager and into that, the association was still pretty young. I think we were on our third president. It was about 6 years in the making, and it was it's a way of organizing all equipment managers together, because what's so unique about equipment managers throughout the league is that we have two things. We have like a brotherhood with it, and I bet you this is the same way through most of pro sports. So, but with NBA specifically, we don't compete with each other. Every single equipment manager helps each other, because that's part of our job. Is like we're loading in with each other. We're talking to each other. We're talking about how hotels are, what the bellmen are like. We just have constant discussions like all day long. And this association is a way of grouping all those thoughts together, and that way we can better ourselves and better the league with our craft and what we do and what we can offer, because we are just the deep down like blood and bone of the league. Behind the scenes, seeing how players like talk behind the, before, after games and during practices, and what the staff are saying, what the coaches are saying, and just putting all those thoughts together in terms of our world with apparel, equipment, uniforms, and all that, and being an avenue for the league to like come to us and ask like what's going on, and we can give them like really good feedback, especially when we're organized like that way as a group.
So important to be able to do that, and it's really cool thinking that there's something for that, and that obviously just the progression of how much that's grown, right? And same way it's growing within the Pistons, but also in the league as a whole is super interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously we spoke about all this cool stuff when it pertains to your job, but the side perk of your job, you get to actually watch the basketball you were talking about at the beginning, and at the start of your career, you saw some fantastic basketball, the championship, right, in your second year. Can you talk about that and maybe that finals run and maybe what it was like doing your job in the bigger picture of all that, of what was going on?
I get goosebumps thinking about it. It's crazy. That is probably the coolest part about this job. And that's what drives you, is that when you're lucky enough to see that high level of basketball, that high level of intensity. And with what I was lucky to see with this group is winning the championship. Yes. Winning, go to the conference, the NBA finals the next year and all those conference finals, is seeing a group of guys that police themselves and coach themselves without extra from the staff. Coaches obviously was there, but they built that culture themselves. It was amazing watching that. And that's one of the things, like when you see championship basketball, is usually it's the players coming together and winning titles. And especially when we didn't have an outright superstar, in that locker room. And I mean, every single night, like I'd see them, the way they talked, there's never really like fighting, arguing, nothing like that. I mean, they were out to dinner after every single game. And I'm going to it was Applebee's. We'd go to Applebee's after the game. All of a sudden, we get there later because we got work done. Also, by the time we get there, they're wrapping up dinner with, it was like the 6 of them, 66 of the players and their wives all together at the same time. They're there every time. And being able to see that was just unbelievable. And the other thing you get from it too is when you are that fly on the wall, you see what it takes as an athlete at a high level to win, and the will to win, and what needs to be done, and seeing the fine tunings of how a point guard like Chauncey manages his team, manages his guys on the floor, manages them off the floor too, to create winning basketball.
definitely really cool just seeing all that high level basketball and so many moments, right? In that way, with this championship run in 2004, all those trips to conference finals, right? You're there for all these big shots and all these great games. The one thing I definitely want to ask you about, especially from the equipment manager side, of being on the floor for it is maybe if you could talk a little bit about the Malice at the Palace and maybe from your perspective, which we kind of see go down from some of those in the building and maybe a little bit of that story.
So that's a really interesting question, because at that time, that was my second year. So I'm still at the team attendant job. So I'm on the court 100%, watching the whole game. One of my jobs was that day was because we switched coaches. So that was the first year I'm rebounding for the home side all the time. Second year, I'm doing more work behind the scenes like that. But we were short that day. So I was actually had to rebound for the visiting team. And I was actually rebounding for our test. And I was thinking and I had, very, very brief interactions, but I'm like, oh, this guy's pretty nice. Like I heard the intensity stories we've had. There was a build up to that, not like a crazy build up, but there was with him around the league, he was kind of known. I was like, oh, this guy's pretty nice. Interesting, cool. And then later on, the Malice, the brawl happens. Where I was at, I was at the home side. I'm working the home bench, and then all of a sudden it happened so quick because where we're at is where I was sitting. This is another funny part. Sometimes you're in the best seat of the house, but you're also in the worst seat of the house too, because where you sit, I was behind 7-footers and a small little chair. So a lot of my time was always funny. Is like when you saw me on the TV, like my family would watch, I was sitting there and I'm going like this the whole time because I'm staring up the jumbotron. All this basketball's going on, but I got this body right here in front of me, so I can't see it. So I was kind of that's where I was, where my perspective was at. So it all just kind of flashed, happened. We didn't know what was going on, and we just saw a bunch of scuffling there, and then we saw scuffling up top, and most of the action of what was going on was on the visiting side, where some of my guys were actually part of it. You saw one guy I was working with trying to pick up one of the fans, that was involved in it, and it was a little scary because it's just unknown, because you just kind of when anything like that happens in a spot you're supposed to feel safe, when you're supposed to have security guards, supposed to have things around, and that's why it was so concerning for, I believe, so concerning for the league, and so in everything, rightfully should, because you don't want anything like that to happen, obviously, right? So, and then the post game was more of a just kind of waiting, they just kind of separate everything, let things not cool down, but just we've got to figure out what happened, because this is before instant replay. I mean, this is was it 05? Or it was 04, 05, or it was 05 when it was fall of or spring of 05?
04. Yep, going into 05.
Yeah. So, I mean, the video footage was camcorder VHS still, when you see those things. So what do it's not instant. No one had cell phones. No one had any kind of pictures going on. So they had to review the footage from what they had from the game. So you don't really find out exactly what happened to the next day and the day after. So it's a different kind of experience, especially for it's one of the things I have to explain to my kids about stuff in the back. Back then, you just don't have that kind of ability. Whereas, I mean, literally right now, if something like that was to happen right now, it'd be on Bleacher Report on my phone, and I'd be looking at it here while it was going on over there 10 seconds earlier, So,
yeah. Definitely, that's the way I kind of being 4 years old at the time when it happened. Everything's kind of in retrospect. So, I mean, thank you for sharing that story, because you're right. It's something. It's one of those moments that of course changed the league forever, and it's not often that you're there. And for one of those moments that was just maybe so impactful, and people talk about it all the time. So thank you for sharing that. But then, obviously, like we said, all that moment, all the win basketball, you definitely saw a lot during that time. I'm curious maybe what you saw maybe in the transition to this current Pistons team, and maybe what you're excited for with this group, because I know you guys have a really young team, and there's a lot on the come up for you guys now.
Yeah, it's really, really cool, because I've seen, because we just talked about we're at the highest of highs, and then for a long time we've been the lowest of lows. Just kind of it's a tough transition, especially at first when you go from playing until June, and then you're playing until May, and then all of a sudden you're just done, and it's tough. You're watching basketball go on still, and this year has been so exciting, than years past, and the culture that we've are building, and it was we have a goal as an organization of where our culture should be and how we should act as a team, how we should act as a staff, and watching that happen, and the young guys we draft, it's been so much fun watching these young guys play this year. Our record hasn't shown anything of what these guys can do. I mean, these guys went from, I wouldn't say they were off the radar, during the draft, obviously, because every player in the draft is high level, but they're just, I guess say naturally just not talked about, right? And now within a few months, these guys are talked about. It's amazing watching them how much better than like they've gotten every single day, and then their hustle, their intensity, and then being able to see what they do before the game and what they do after the game and making all the right choices. That's what I get excited about, is when I see players that just care about the game, care about themselves, care about everybody else around them, how they conduct themselves, how they interact with each other, how they interact with me. And it's awesome. It's a really, really cool. I'm really excited for the years to come from with this group.
Oh, so cool. I definitely can't wait to see that outlook. And then definitely there's so much that you go into it, and maybe all those words that you think maybe categorize that group. The one thing, but kind of before we get into that, I do want to ask you some quick fire questions. I think it'd be a lot of fun. First off, if you could, quickly, in terms of the only players that you've seen, none of the bad boys guys, but what's the Kong Pistons starting five from your years with the Pistons?
Oh, only players I've seen?
Yep.
Like play. Okay. So, holy moly. All right, you got to have Rashid. Okay, so Rashid, the guy could play any sport and be a champion. It's crazy. Ping pong, be a champion. See, Rashid. Okay, well, I got to go. Honestly, I got to go to the starting five from 2004.
Really? Right? Okay.
Because that, I know, not that it's unfair, because I know that works, and I know that team
a little bit,
like everybody, right? So the other thing, I've seen like some great all-stars come through, and Allen Iverson, Tracy McGrady. There's been so many guys. Like I have that's wrong story, but I had like this old like this kind of cigar box that they made for everybody the last year at the Palace, and it had all the players that played for the Pistons and all the concerts, stuff like that, all etched in. And I took a crayon and scratched into every player. The thing is half full, so I've seen half the amount of players that the entire Pistons organization had.
Wow.
So that's a tough question. So I'm going to go easy way and say starting 504.
And it works. Obviously, you might win a championship if you go with that roster.
Yeah.
Next question I have is, who's the neatest Pistons player you've ever had in that locker room? That was like so meticulous. You never really had to bother them or anything. They just always had their stuff all tidy.
Juan Dixon.
That was fast. That was a fast one.
So he was very neat. Had a towel down. He put it there, and he had his stuff lined up. And there's been a lot of guys like that, but that's the guy I always remember, like, because he's one of the first guys to be clean. There's a lot of clean guys. There's a lot of dirty guys. There's a lot. I wouldn't say dirty. I'd say right? Because they're not dirty. It's just they got a lot of stuff sometimes. But Juan Dixon, I remember him. Yeah.
So that's the follow-up then. Who's the messiest or most unorganized Pistons player that just always had all their stuff all over the floor?
I wouldn't say unorganized, but Stanley Johnson.
Okay.
That's like one of my favorite guys too. Like I talk to him to this day still and all that. And it wasn't that he wasn't messy as much as he had so many shoes. He's one of the first guys that had. He's the reason why I created my shoe bags, because he would have a new pair every single day to a point where it filled up and then started going out.
It's funny. No, and then so that's funny. And then I'm thinking, right, you're always on the bench next to these guys, right? You have these huge 7-footers in front of you blocking your view, but who was the funniest guy that you just loved sitting next to on the bench? It just always made you laugh.
I'll be honest with you, halftime I'm the one trying to get those guys to laugh. So now recently, but funniest guy, Rashid, because he would have no filter. And
okay, definitely.
But he's one of the smartest guys I've ever met too. Like he knows what to say, knows what not to say. Everything's calculated. And like that's, when he talks and how you get the text, I think at halftime he was almost 90%, 99% of the time he was right. So, but he was always a funny guy. And then, and consistently always one of the best like that. So
I'm thinking then, obviously a lot of the things that you do or maybe they're all systematic, right? It's like everyone's wearing the same jersey, right? A lot of those stuff is the same. But a couple of times I'd imagine, right, guys ask for things custom made or singular custom requests. Like, what's the craziest thing anyone's like, hey, Con, can you go get me this? What was that?
Craziest custom things. Well, I do a lot of that because I do a lot of weird custom stuff with that. It's tough to say because we have so many rules in place that it kind of like blocks a lot of that with the league rules and decorum that we have. I want to say one of the craziest ones I've had to do was I had a guy that was very tall and very skinny, and I had to take in the tights to fit his legs. But it wasn't like a crazy request, right? He just wanted tights that fit. So what I did was I just shortened the tights up with my sewing machine and got everything kind of set like that. So they actually fit him. It was pretty happy. It was one of the first pair of tights that ever fit him. So that was kind of cool. That was kind of a cool experience getting that, like just having that face like, wow, I've never had this before. So
I've never had things that fit. You made a dream come true. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So my last quick fire question is, what's the coolest thing in your office right now?
That's
gonna be. I know that's gonna be the toughest one. It's a tough question.
Look here. Coolest. I have a bunch. So like this is backup goggles. I'm not sure who wore them. Some wore them at some point. But yeah, so this is one of those random things that Jordan kind of left over that grab because it was like what it would be. Abner used to carry these as a backup. So if something happens during the game, you can put them on really quick. And then I think they were somebody's originally from like the 70s or 80s, which is cool. Some of that cool stuff. I mean, I got a bunch of shoes signed for me, like by guys that have. See, this is cool. This is my most recent one. This because he's. We talk about players that were awesome like that. So I got Derrick Rose.
That's awesome.
Signed a jersey for me. Just like that was just one of the cool things. That I got a bunch of UFC stuff because that was another avenue. Like this helped me like get involved with actually the UFC to a point of we took guys to train there. So we had an opportunity. I got a bunch of like gloves and stuff like that were signed. We were able to meet all the champions at the time. So that was cool. That's in here.
That's awesome. And a lot of those things, right? It's so cool having those things in your office. And they prompted a few follow-up questions for me just in general. With the guys that saw Rip Hamilton's mask, I mean, was that something that kind of like his doctors always think, but after a while when he didn't need it anymore, it was kind of just like his persona. Was that something you handled?
Yeah, I didn't handle it at the time because I was around it. But that was our trainer. Really, like that was him. He was doing all that at the time. But for him with his mask, for Rip was a guy of consistency to where he had a routine that he followed before and after games and all that. And that was once he had it on, became part of his routine. And he took it off a couple times, but then the couple times he did take it off, his nose did re-break, I think. And if I remember right, if he hit it one more time, there might have been some kind of damage. So that was one of the reasons why he kept it on for the rest of his career. But he, like I said, he was always a consistent guy. Like I remember this time when he would walk by and he'd get a new headband every game, new pair of socks every game, that kind of thing like that. And he would get the headband and it turned into me like handing him his headband out of the drawer because it was back there. And then one time somebody else grabbed it and then he was like, he saw me, he had me grab it and then give it back to him. Then he left.
That's funny. And then I've been hinting at this almost the whole show. I'm sure our listeners have noticed that the words on the back of your wall, right? Hustle, perseverance, grind, success all the way at the top. If you could write the little pyramid you have going on. What do all those words mean to you and why are they there?
It means a lot because I feel like with this job, the way my lifestyle is, I even have a tattoo on my back. The section Japanese says, never give up, never give in. That's kind of how I've kind of lived and with the grind. And the core of what this job needs in any aspect at this level of the pro level, hustling, perseverance, keeping to it all the time, keep grinding, and then just keeping, everything in perspective and then executing to get the success like the premier. It sounds corny, right? But when you feel it and you live this many, we don't have off days, that's when you really have to push through stuff with a grind. And whenever I'm looking for, everybody always asks me, because everyone wants to get an equipment. Everybody thinks they can do it because it's from the outside, but you don't realize the amount of toll it takes on you, takes on your family, and not seeing events. I mean, it's you're not going home. I mean, like I'm lucky enough to where I'm from Detroit and I'm here and my parents are here. And like even with my parents here, I sometimes don't see them for months at a time because that's the way it is. And some people can't go that route without traveling home for a little while, right? You don't get that at all with the NBA. It's a different type of grind. Like every sport has its grind. Like football has its grind. Like I think football's tough. The way that their equipment managers are. I mean, you're talking staying in a hotel at home during training camp and getting 2 hours of sleep, 4 hours of sleep every night, and that. But then the way their season goes is their grind. But then our grind is like a gradual grind, right? And that's where I feel like those things go through because the perseverance. Because like training camp is tough. It's not awful, but it's tough. It takes a lot out of you, the prep to it and all that. And then you start traveling and then you get rest here and there, you get rest on the road a little bit, but then it's every little bit like just chips away throughout the year. And by most people with the first year in the NBA, by the time they get about halfway through the season, they're just like, why'd I oh my gosh, like I never realized what a grind this is because you're on the plane, off the plane, on the plane, off the plane, and then back home and then shoot around and practice. And then you're home midday for like sometimes because like this time of year, we're like low maintenance for mid-season form, so there's not as much to do midday to take care of the games. But that's like, well, great, you get an hour, 2 hours, but then you're right back in it, until 1 a.m. And for equipment manager perspective, it's like during your busiest times, you're here at 7 a.m, getting around for a shoot around, that's at 10 o'clock. You're prepping for it, getting ready for players, getting it ready, and then you're cleaning up at the shoot around, and then next thing you know, 3:00 rolls around and the visiting team's there loading in, and you're helping with that. Game's going on, and fast forward all that stuff at 11:00 at night, 11:30 you're wrapping up, and then you got practice the next morning. So that's where perseverance and just all that just comes into play. Okay, so I guess one of the best parts about this job that you really get and have is like you get to build relationships with players. As I would say, like kind of like as peers and working buddies all the time, and you end up getting to know guys on a personal level, and that's one of my favorite things about this job is building those relationships with coaches and players, and as they move across the league, and then every time you're on a road trip, you cross paths and say, hey, what's going on, and just getting to know people on a different level than what you see from the famous side of things, right? And one of the coolest things that happened for me is that growing up in like Metro Detroit, in the suburbs of Detroit, being sheltered to a point, right? And then coming into the working with the Pistons, and all of a sudden I'm hearing stories from guys from all across the U.S. I mean, you're hearing stories from guys how they grew up across the world, and the locker room conversations that happen that you're a part of, that you just can't put a price on some of the things of like hearing how much different it is growing up in Alabama from like Ben Wallace and how he came up. And then you hear a guy how he came up in like Europe, and then Zaza talking about Georgia. And it's amazing the perspective like you can get on the world, and just opens your eyes to so many things. And that is probably one of the best things about this job, especially being in the NBA, is how it opens the door to a whole new world and a whole new perspective, and seeing how things are just different everywhere. Because everybody grows up and you just feel like right? You feel like you know how the world is, but you really don't. I mean, no matter how much until you find out, until you hear about how people live somewhere else, and what it's like living in the city of Chicago compared to the city of New York City, compared to like, we're living in Queens and the different areas there from street to street, and Brooklyn, and it's unbelievable. And the West Coast kids, they come out, there, and that kind of puts me in another funny story there with Stanley Johnson, who drove me nuts his rookie year, right? Nuts. And now he's one of my favorite guys of all time. Like I love talking, love seeing him. I miss him. I wish he was on a team still now, because like conversation we could have back and forth. But he was the first player that when he came in about 2 months into the season, I like realized I became my parents. In terms of like, because you feel like you have a grasp of your youth and things like that, and then all of a sudden, like, I had no idea what the music he was listening to. I had no idea how, like, his dance moves. I had no idea about like anything, right? And I wasn't alone. There's some vets in the locker room are kind of the same way too. But like, wow, I just became my parents. Like, and then you put in perspective, like, oh yeah, when I'm listening to my music on the way home, that was from '97. Yeah, that was 18 years ago. Yeah, yeah, I had my parents.
Oh, that's absolutely hilarious. Thinking about, and then I would see more. It'd be 24 years ago. I don't want to date you, but it'd be a little more.
Yeah, no, yeah. I'm 40 now, so like I hit the milestone. So yeah, it's cool though. It's a great thing. That's another thing that's kind of cool too. Is like I'm never stuck in a rut. So I always see younger generations coming in every single time. So it's kind of maybe I have more of a grasp on it with my kids now. Probably don't.
But that must be really refreshing.
Yeah, but I guess the relationships are awesome.
So key.
Yeah.
Oh, and thank you for breaking that down for us, because it's so many people that I've spoken to have thought about being equipment managers. The people that I know have always brought that up, and they know. I mean, it goes with any job in the NBA, right? Everything comes with there's a price to be paid. There's a grind. There's work you have to put in. And this is a great way to end the show, because hearing you say that definitely is a way to perfectly encapsulate what it is exactly that you do. Is you're a grinder, you persevere, you hustle, and I can't see the other words, but I'm sure, but I know you do all those things too. So Kong, thank you so much for coming on the show. This was awesome. I mean, there was definitely so many things. I mean, this was one of the funniest shows I've ever done. There was so many things to kind of laugh about and think about all the good times that you've had. So really thank you for coming on, and can't wait to talk again soon.
Oh yeah, actually I got one story for you.
Oh, go for it.
Okay, so I was thinking it's kind of funny because like I live this every day, right? So I'm like, it's always fun to like kind of recap a little bit of what I've gone through, because then all of a sudden I start remembering stories that I like hadn't thought about in years. And one of the early ones was sitting behind the bench, and we were playing San Antonio, and many times that crew in 04, 05, 06 was just dominating the game, right? And last 2 minutes, Spurs throwing their extra guys. I'm sitting behind the bench because I was like behind, and it was Ben Wallace was sitting there, Corliss, Ron Dupree. No, Corliss wasn't there. Sorry, it was after Corliss, but no, it was Ben Wallace and Ron Dupree, Rip, and Chauncey were all there on the bench. And then all of a sudden, and I think McDice might just came out. Anyway, and this guy, this really tall, like I remember the tall guy center for San Antonio is out there, and he pulls up for a three right in front of our bench, airballs it, and I was like, man, that guy shoots like me. That's what I said. Like all of a sudden, I didn't realize how loud I said it. The bench erupts, like laughing, and then like Ron Dupree's like crying, like he reaches back, grabs my leg, and Ben Wallace just turns around and just looks like this, like what the, and kind of like looking at me like, you shoot like that, kind of funny thing. And so it's just, we never really realized, like sometimes, you know, when you're around like that, you just, you know, those type of moments. Another story too that was always fun. My very first day, to go back to that first day, and my first job was making the Gatorade. And so back then we had liquid concentrate, and pouring it in. I guess I didn't mix it that well, right? So because we put the ice and water in, poured it in, mixed it. You know, there's so many better ways to do it than that. And Dirk Nowitzki in pregame warmups comes over, gets a drink, and he goes, like, what is this? Like, what's going on? And apparently it was all syrup on the bottom. So it was early on, the smallest details like that.
No, those are what matters, and that's what all you guys are consistently doing and keeping on top of. So I mean, thank you for sharing. Those stories were hilarious in both of them. But whether it's the air ball, whether it's Dirk, just imagine Dirk spitting out and be like, "What is this?" Yeah, that's great. That is awesome. No, and honestly, I'm sure there's so many more. I mean, if maybe we could talk after if anything comes to mind. Definitely text, because these are all gems for sure. But seriously, thank you so much for coming on and sharing this stuff, because it was really great and paints such a good picture to everyone about what it is that career managers actually do.
No, I appreciate it. It was great to be on here. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Gen Z Hoops. Make sure to follow, like, and subscribe on Instagram, LinkedIn, and all major social media platforms at Gen Z Hoops. You can tune in and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and every other podcast platform on the planet. Get ready for the next episode.